Before we begin, I'd love your support. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you the untold stories of the famous that truly deserve to be remembered. In Brownsville, Brooklyn, survival stank of garbage and piss. Mike Tyson was only 12 when desperation drove him behind a rusted dumpster, clutching stolen cigarettes against his chest. The math was simple. Tony Barreto promised $5 for these Marlboros. $5 meant food that night. You little piece of garbage. I see you. Morty's voice cut through the alley from his corner store. The kid could see him, belly hanging over his belt, thick finger pointed accusingly. Mrs. Rodriguez beside him wore that familiar expression. The look everyone gave Tyson, like he was already lost. He ran, feet slapping broken concrete down Dumont Avenue, dodging parked cars, jumping trash piles the city never bothered collecting. The cigarettes bounced in his arms as one thought pounded through his head. $5 to survive another day. At Livonia Avenue's corner, the boy slammed into something solid. When he looked up, his world shifted. Well, look what we got here. Ricky Martinez. 3 older boys who'd made terrorizing Tyson their daily entertainment. Ricky was 15, with a patchy mustache and a scar carved down his left cheek. Tommy and Carlos flanked him like enforcers, all sporting pristine white sneakers that somehow never touched Brownsville's filth. Ain't this the fat boy who thinks he's tough? Tommy's grip clamped down on the kid's shoulder. The cigarettes scattered across broken sidewalk, $5 rolling in different directions. Marlboro Reds. Carlos examined a fallen pack. Where'd you get money for these? I found them. Ricky's laugh was harsh, metallic. You steal these, didn't you, thief? The accusation landed like a physical blow because it was true. But when your mother's too strung out to remember your name, when electricity's been cut for 3 weeks and moldy bread is all that's left, you know what survival demands. The choice was steal or starve. Give them back. Ricky's fist buried itself in the boy's stomach. Air rushed out, copper taste flooding his mouth from a bit-tin tongue. That's for disrespect. Now, let's discuss payment. They're mine. I need them. Tommy's knuckles found the kid's eye. Stars exploded across his vision as Carlos swept his legs, sending him crashing to concrete. Blood welled from scraped palms, mixing with street grime that seemed permanently embedded in these blocks. Please, my mom's sick. Your mom's a junkie whore, Ricky stated with clinical detachment. Everyone knows. And her fat son shedding the same direction. The words hit deeper than their fists. Not because they were cruel, Tyson had heard worse, but because underneath the rage, he recognized their truth. She destroyed herself with needles. He destroyed himself with desperation and hunger that never ended. What should we do with him? I got an idea. Ricky's tone carried something that made the air feel thinner. Know what they do to thieves in some places. Cut off their hands. The switchblade emerged, metal catching late afternoon light. In its surface, Tyson could see his own terrified reflection. Maybe just a finger. The pinky. You won't miss it. No, please. I'll pay you back. With what money? I'll work for you. Steal for you. Whatever. Ricky considered this, blade turning slowly. I like that. But first, respect. They hauled him upright, pinning his arms while Ricky traced cold steel down his cheek. Pressure without cutting, but enough to promise what could come. Pain teaches what words can't. The boy closed his eyes, thinking of his mother passed out on their couch, needle hanging from her arm, lost in whatever chemical dream kept her from this reality. She wouldn't notice his absence until tomorrow, if at all. Nobody was coming. At 12, Tyson faced a truth most never do. Survival often means standing completely alone. But he wasn't strong enough. Just a scared kid with no money, no allies, no future stretching beyond these brutal blocks. The blade bit skin. Warm blood began its journey down his face. That's when heavy footsteps approached. Measured, purposeful, not belonging to any neighborhood kid. What the hell is this? The voice carried weight, gravelly, weathered by experience. Someone who'd seen things, survived things that would break most people. Nothing, old man. Teaching this thief respect. That's so. The man wasn't tall, maybe 5'8", but carried himself with a presence that filled space beyond his physical dimensions. dark skin weathered like old leather, gray threading his temples. But his eyes held the kind of authority that came from standing in rings with killers and walking out victorious. You boys need better entertainment. Mind your business, Pops. This don't concern you. 3 boys carving up 1 kid? That's my business now. Steel ran underneath his calm words. He moved with fluid precision, every muscle coordinated through decades of discipline. Older, maybe 50, but radiating control danger. You don't know who you're messing with, old man. His smile held no warmth. No, son. You don't know who you're messing with. Tommy's grip loosened. Ricky backed up, knife trembling slightly. Let the boy go. Walk away. If I see you bothering him again, our next conversation will be different. Fuck you. What happened next defied physics. The stranger moved impossibly fast. One moment standing 10 feet away, the next Ricky was sprawled on concrete, blades skittering across broken asphalt. The man's fist hung, extended from a punch the kid barely registered. Tommy and Carlos released their prisoner immediately. Ricky rolled, clutching his jaw, blood streaming between his fingers, gold tooth glinting on the sidewalk beside him. What the fuck was that? Education in respect. Want more? The 3 scrambled away like startled animals, Ricky needing support to stand, his threats hollow as they retreated into Brownsville's maze of broken dreams. But the stranger's attention had shifted entirely. You all right, son? Tyson touched his cut cheek. Think so. Let me see. The man knelt beside him. Up close, his face told stories. Nose broken multiple times, knuckles scarred from impacts harder than human bone. But genuine concern lived in his eyes. Not deep. Won't eat stitches. Who are you? Cus D'Amato. And you just learned something important. What? Sometimes when you think the world's forgotten you, help arrives from places you never expected. Looking at scattered cigarettes, blood on concrete, setting sun casting shadows across this moment, Tyson realized his $5 meant nothing now. Why help me? 'Cause stood, joints creaking, walking home from my gym. I train fighters, boxers. When I saw what was happening, he shrugged. Don't tolerate bullies. You train boxers? Longer than you've been breathing. Something stirred in the boy's chest. Not hope exactly, but its distant cousin. Could you teach me to fight like that? 'Cause studied him, taking in split lip, swelling eye, torn clothes. But searching for something else too. Real fighting isn't about hurting people, son. Boxing is discipline. Converting fear into power, weakness into strength. Discovering who you really are when everything else gets stripped away. I want to learn. What's your name? Michael Tyson. Mike. Well, Mike, 'cause extended his hand. If you're serious, ready to work harder than you've imagined possible, maybe we can talk. But first, let's get you home and clean that cut. The boy took that offered hand, calloused from decades of training champions, yet gentle in its grip. As they walked from that alley together, leaving cigarettes and blood behind, neither Tyson nor anyone on those streets understood what had just shifted. This gray-haired stranger was about to alter the trajectory of a life that seemed destined for destruction. He would take a fat, desperate kid from Brooklyn's most unforgiving neighborhood and forge him into a most feared fighter the world had ever seen. But that night, all Mike Tyson knew was that for the first time in 12 years of existence, he wasn't walking alone. And sometimes, that's exactly what it takes to save a life. 3 days after Cus D'Amato pulled him from that alley, Mike Tyson stood outside a converted firehouse on 14th Street, staring at a faded sign reading Gramercy Gym. His cut had scabbed over, the swelling had subsided, but the real wounds, carved by 12 years of abandonment, would take longer to heal. You coming in? Or are you going to stand there all morning? The kid hesitated. 3 days of actual meals, clean clothes, sleeping without fear. It felt like a dream that could vanish. Dreams had a way of becoming nightmares in Brownsville. It's different once you cross that threshold, Cus said. In there, you're not the fat kid from the projects. You become whoever you choose to be. The door opened into another world. The smell hit first, leather and chalk, honest sweat instead off desperation. Sounds were rhythmic, purposeful, gloves hitting bags in steady combinations, jump ropes whipping concrete, sharp exhales of fighters throwing punches with intention rather than rage. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating floating chalk dust. Along walls hung photographs of fighters whose eyes all carried the same quality: focus, discipline, something approaching peace. "This is where champions are made," Cus said quietly. "Not in rings during fights. Right here, when nobody's watching." A Puerto Rican fighter shadowboxed near the far wall, movements flowing like water. Another kid worked a speed bag with machine precision. Everyone moved with purpose, aggression channeled rather than wild. They all came from places like yours. Broken homes, broken neighborhoods. But they chose to build something different. "Why are you doing this?" Cus studied him. "Because I see something in you that scares and excites me equally." That first session humbled Tyson completely. He thought he knew fighting, street fighting, survival fighting. But this demanded intelligence, timing, psychology. Cus started with basics: stance, breathing, keeping hands up without dropping them after 30 seconds. "Boxing isn't about being tough," Cus explained, adjusting his stance repeatedly. "Any fool can take a beating. This is about controlling violence, not surrendering to it." 10 minutes in, Tyson's muscles screamed. Sweat poured down his face, legs shaking from maintaining proper position. Street fights lasted seconds, explosive, decisive. This required endurance he didn't possess. "I can't," he gasped, dropping his hands. "Can't or won't." Can't means impossible. Won't means choosing to quit. Which is it? Familiar rage built, the anger that had sustained him through chaos. But looking at Cus, he saw something unprecedented. Patience mixed with genuine expectation. Not pity or judgment, but belief he could do better. He raised his hands again. Weeks established unprecedented rhythm. Dawn wake-up, breakfast Cus provided, 3 hours training, afternoon tutoring, education was non-negotiable. More training, dinner, early sleep. Structure. For the first time, Tyson experienced predictability's luxury, knowing where his next meal came from, where he'd sleep, what tomorrow brought. But old patterns don't die quietly. During his 3rd week, Tyson exploded during sparring. His partner, Rodriguez, kept slipping punches, making him look foolish. Something snapped. Years of powerlessness, of being laughed at, of being nothing. He threw wild haymakers that missed completely, started windmilling both arms like a street fighter, abandoning technique for pure rage. Rodriguez stepped back, confused, as Tyson grunted with each missed swing. "Stop!" Tyson spun toward Cus, chest heaving, eyes wild. "He's making me look stupid." "You're making yourself look stupid. Rodriguez is using skill instead of emotion. You're reverting because learning is harder. This is bullshit." He ripped off his headgear, threw it across the gym. "I survived 12 years without you." The gym went silent. Every fighter stopped. In that moment, Tyson felt familiar isolation rushing back. The sense that he'd ruined something good, that he was fundamentally designed to destroy anything pure. Cus walked over, picked up the headgear, handed it back. "You survived. But surviving isn't living. If all you want is survival, you don't need this. But if you want to become more than your circumstances, make a choice now." "What choice?" "Whether you trust me enough to help you become who you're supposed to be." The question hung like chalk dust. Trust meant vulnerability. It meant admitting his way hadn't worked, that he needed something beyond himself. He put the headgear back on. That evening, walking toward the subway, Cus broke his usual silence. "You know what I see when I look at you? A fat kid who can't throw a proper punch. I see natural power most dream of. Someone hurt so much he's learned to hurt first. But mostly, Asanwo's never had a father believe in him." The words hit harder than any punch. Tyson stopped walking, pretending to tie his shoe. "Your mother made her choices," Cus said gently. "They weren't about you. They were about her pain. But they left you believing you weren't worth fighting for." That's a lot. In the subway's fluorescent lighting, Cus looked older than his years. Tyson realized this man was investing everything in a kid who might never amount to anything. "Why do you care?" "I trained Floyd Patterson in a champion, but failed him as a man. I swore I wouldn't make that mistake again." Their train approached, and they climbed aboard. Floyd won titles, made money, became famous. But he never believed in himself. When pressure came, he couldn't handle it. Lost his title, lost his way, lost pieces he never recovered. Cus stared at tunnel walls flashing past. The next fighter I train, I won't just build a champion. I'll build someone who can survive being champion. You think I can be champion? I don't think. I know you will be. The question is whether you'll still be Mike Tyson when it happens, or whether fame and pressure will eat away who we're building now. The train reached Tyson Station, but he didn't move. What if I'm not strong enough? Strength isn't never falling. Strength is getting back up every time. You've been doing that your whole life. As Tyson finally stood, Cus caught his arm. In all my years, I've learned talent is common. Heart is rare. Discipline rarer still. But rarest and most dangerous, a fighter with nothing left to lose. Dangerous how? He'll go places others won't. Take insane risks. Push through pain that stops normal men. But that same quality can become self-destructive. The doors began closing. You have that quality, Mike. It's your greatest asset and biggest threat. My job is teaching you to control it before it controls you. As the train pulled away, Cus' words echoed during Tyson's walk through Brownsville's brutal streets. For the first time, someone saw potential instead of problems. Someone would invest in his future rather than manage his present. But the warning lingered too. This rage that kept him alive, it was powerful enough to destroy everything they were building. The very quality that would make him champion could become his undoing. Climbing stairs to his apartment, passing familiar smells of poverty and neglect, Tyson made his decision. He would trust this gray-haired man who saw something he couldn't see himself. Submit town-precedented discipline, embrace foreign structure. He would let Cus D'Amato transform his pain into power, rage into precision, desperation into dominance. What neither could foresee was how completely that transformation would succeed and how catastrophically it would fail. The bond lifting Mike Tyson from Brooklyn streets to athletic pinnacle would become the foundation of his most devastating vulnerabilities. For the first time, Tyson had discipline, structure, and someone who believed in him. But belief, like power, can be a dangerous thing. 6 months after stepping into Cus D'Amato's world, Mike Tyson threw his first competitive punch. The opponent was a 17-year-old Golden Gloves veteran from Albany named Jimmy Richardson. Lean, experienced, confident. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Tyson exploded from his corner like something unleashed from captivity. His first left hook caught Richardson flush on the temple, dropping him to one knee. Before the referee could intervene, the right uppercut lifted the older boy completely off the canvas. He landed unconscious, blood trickling from his mouth onto the canvas of the Catskill Youth Center. The crowd of maybe 40 people sat in stunned silence. They'd come expecting to see the fat kid from Brooklyn get taught a lesson. Instead, they witnessed something that would become legend in small-town gyms across New York. The birth of a destroyer. "Sweet Jesus," whispered an old trainer sitting ringside. What the hell was that? Cus watched from the corner, expressionless. But those who knew him noticed his hands, steady throughout the brief violence, now trembling slightly as he climbed through the ropes to check on Richardson. He'd seen raw power before, trained champions who could end fights with single punches. But this was different. This carried malice that seemed to transcend the sport itself. "You okay?" Tyson asked Richardson as EMTs attended to him, genuine concern replacing the fury that had consumed him moments before. That split personality, devastating violence followed by childlike worry, would define every fight that followed. Outside the ring, Tyson remained the insecure kid who sought Cus approval for everything from meal choices to bedtime. Inside, he became something else entirely. Word spread quickly through boxing's underground networks. There's a kid in Catskill, 15 years old, fights like a man possessed, knocks people out in seconds. You have to see it to believe it. The second fight lasted 8 seconds. Third fight, 14 seconds. By his 10th bout, seasoned amateur coaches were refusing to put their fighters against him. Not because they feared losing. Losing was part of boxing. They feared what Tyson might do to their boys. He doesn't just want to win, observed a veteran trainer for Buffalo after watching Tyson demolish his best prospect. He wants to hurt people, really hurt them. That's not boxing, that's something else. Because saw beyond the violence to its source. During late-night conversations in his cluttered office above the gym, surrounded by faded photographs of champions and handwritten training notes spanning decades, he worked to understand the psychological engine driving Tyson's destructive power. Fear is the fire you must learn to control, he told Tyson during one such session. Not eliminate, control. Fear of being hurt, fear of losing, fear of being nothing again. That fear is what makes you dangerous, but it's also what makes you vulnerable. I'm not afraid when I fight, Tyson protested. Yes, you are. You're terrified. That's why you try to end fights so quickly, because every second that passes is another chance for your opponent to prove you're still that fat, helpless kid getting carved up in an alley. The observation hit like physical impact. Tyson had never articulated it, but Cus was right. Every fight felt like survival, like returning to that moment with a knife against his cheek. The ring became his alley. His opponent became Ricky Martinez, and every punch carried the accumulated rage of years spent powerless. The great ones, Cus continued, they learned to use that fear without being consumed by it. They channel terror into technique, desperation into discipline. But the dangerous ones, they never make that transition. They stay trapped in that original moment of helplessness, fighting the same fight over and over. As winter approached, Tyson's reputation spread beyond amateur circles. Small newspapers began running stories about the Catskill destroyer. Gym owners from Albany to Syracuse called asking about sparring sessions, half hoping Cus would agree, half praying he wouldn't. The attention brought validation Tyson had never experienced. For 16 years, he'd been invisible, ignored by teachers, forgotten by his mother, dismissed by peers. Now, people drove hours just to watch him train. Writers took notes. Photographers captured his image. But with recognition came responsibility, and Cus noticed troubling signs. Tyson began arriving late for training, testing boundaries that had been absolute for months. He started mouthing off to sparring partners, showing disrespect that would have been unthinkable earlier. The breaking point came during a December sparring session with a visiting professional from New York City. Tony Marchetti was a journeyman heavyweight, 28 years old with 43 professional fights. He'd agreed to work with the kid from Catskill as a favor to Cus, expecting to provide valuable experience against a larger, older opponent. Tyson hurt him badly in the first round, a combination that opened a cut over Marchetti's left eye and staggered him against the ropes. But instead of backing off as Cus had taught him, instead of showing control that separated sport from street fighting, Tyson pressed forward with killing intent. The barrage that followed was less boxing than assault. Marchetti covered up, trying to survive, while Tyson threw punches with increasing fury. Left hooks to the body, right hands to the head, uppercuts that lifted the professional off his feet. The man's mouthpiece flew out, blood sprayed across the ring, and still Tyson continued punching. Stop! Cus' voice cut through the violence. Mike, stop! Tyson paused mid-punch, chest heaving, eyes still wild with rage. Marchetti slumped against the ropes, conscious but badly hurt. It had been 8 rounds scheduled. They'd barely completed 3. Get out, Cus told Tyson quietly. Cool off. We'll talk later. That night, in Cus' small apartment above the gym, they had their most difficult conversation yet. You could have killed him, Cus said without preamble. He was fighting back. You were just what? Following instincts? Using your power? That man has children, Mike. A wife. He came here to help you learn, and you tried to destroy him. Tyson stared at his hands, swollen knuckles that had caused so much damage in so little time. I couldn't stop. Once I hurt him, I wanted to hurt him more. It felt good. The admission hung between them. Cus had suspected this, had seen hints of it in how Tyson's eyes changed during violence, how he seemed to feed off his opponent's pain. But hearing it confirmed was different. That feeling, Cus said carefully, is what separates you from other fighters. It's also what could destroy you. Great champions channel that hunger into performance. But if you can't control it, if you become addicted to hurting people. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As 1980 approached, Tyson's amateur record stood at 15-0 with 15 knockouts. Boxing Illustrated ran their first feature story about him, calling him the most devastating amateur prospect in decades. ESPN requested footage of his fights. Professional promoters began making inquiries about his future plans. But Cus was becoming increasingly concerned about more than boxing. During training sessions, he experienced moments of fatigue that left him breathless and pale. Sometimes his hands shook when he held the pads. His legendary memory, capable of recalling precise details from fights 30 years past, began showing gaps. Tyson noticed everything. The way Cus would pause mid-sentence, searching for words that had always come effortlessly. How he would sit down between rounds when he'd always remained standing. The slight tremor in his voice when giving instructions. "Are you sick?" Tyson asked one evening as they reviewed fight footage. "I'm old," Cus replied. "There's a difference." But there wasn't really. At 73, Cus D'Amato was aging rapidly under the stress of managing a volatile teenager with unlimited potential and limited self-control. His doctor had mentioned concerns about his heart, suggestions about reducing stress, warnings about the demands of training elite athletes at his age. Cus ignored them all. He'd spent his life building champions, and Tyson represented his masterpiece, the perfect synthesis of natural ability and cultivated technique. But masterpieces, he knew, could be fragile things. The defining moment of this period came at the Empire State Games in Syracuse. Tyson faced Marcus Williams, a decorated amateur from Detroit with over 50 wins and legitimate professional prospects. The fight was scheduled for 3 rounds, broadcast live on local television, with college scouts and professional promoters in attendance. Williams had studied Tyson's film, understood his patterns, came with a strategy designed to neutralize his power and exploit his inexperience. For 30 seconds, the plan worked. Williams moved well, used his jab effectively, made Tyson miss with several wild shots. Then Tyson landed. The right hand that ended Marcus Williams' amateur career wasn't the hardest punch Tyson had ever thrown, but it was the most perfectly timed. Williams leaned forward to throw a jab, and Tyson's right cross met him halfway. The impact lifted Williams' feet completely off the canvas, and he landed in a position that left no doubt about the fight's conclusion. The arena fell silent. Television commentators struggled for words. In the stands, hardened boxing men who'd seen thousands of knockouts stared at the canvas where Williams lay motionless, struggling to process what they'd witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the ring announcer's voice cracked slightly. "The winner by knockout at 1 minute and 37 seconds of round 1. Mike Tyson." As EMTs attended to Williams, Tyson looked toward his corner. Cus was there, but something was wrong. The old man's face had gone pale, his breathing labored, one hand clutching his chest. "Cus!" Tyson vaulted over the ropes, his moment of triumph forgotten. "Cus!" By the time he reached the corner, Cus had recovered enough to wave off concerned officials. "I'm fine," he insisted, but his voice was weak, unconvincing. They drove back to Catskill in silence, the radio playing highlights of Tyson's devastating victory. But neither man was celebrating. Tyson kept glancing at his mentor, noting the gray pallor, the way Cus' hands trembled on the steering wheel. "You scared me tonight," Tyson said finally. "I scare myself," Cus admitted. "But not in the ring. What scared me was watching you become exactly what I've been trying to create, and wondering if I've made something too dangerous to control." As they pulled into the driveway of the small house they shared above the gym, both men understood that their time together was racing toward an end neither was prepared to face. Tyson was ascending toward championship level at unprecedented speed, but Cus was fading just as rapidly. The boy who had been rescued from an alley was becoming the most feared fighter on earth. The man who saved him was running out of time to complete his greatest work. And somewhere in the space between those two truths lay the tragedy that would define everything that followed. The first sign came during a routine training session in February 1985. Cus D'Amato collapsed while holding pads, his 75-year-old body crumpling to the canvas without warning. Tyson dropped his gloves and rushed to his mentor's side, finding him conscious but gasping, his face gray as winter concrete. "Just tired," Cus insisted, waving off concerned gym members. But his hands shook as Tyson helped him tow a chair, and his breathing came in shallow, desperate gulps that fooled no one. The doctor's diagnosis was blunt: pneumonia complicated by a weak heart and decades of stress. Cus needed rest, medication, and significantly reduced activity. For a man who'd lived his entire adult life inside boxing gyms, it was essentially a death sentence delivered in medical terms. "You need to take care of yourself," Tyson pleaded that night in Cus' small apartment. "Let someone else handle the gym for a while." "There is no one else," Cus replied quietly. "Not for you. Not for what you're about to become." What Tyson was becoming was impossible to ignore. At 19, he destroyed every amateur opponent placed in front of him, accumulated a record that read like fiction rather than fact. Professional promoters circled like vultures, offering contracts worth more money than either man had imagined possible. The heavyweight championship, the most coveted prize in sports, seemed not a question of if but when. But success meant nothing if Cus wasn't there to witness it. Over the following months, Tyson watched his father figure fade with terrifying consistency. Training sessions became shorter. Cus' legendary technical insights came less frequently. Sometimes he would forget details about upcoming fights or repeat instructions he'd given minutes earlier. The worst part was the fear Tyson saw in Cus' eyes. Not fear of death, but fear of leaving his greatest creation unfinished and unprotected. "Promise me something," Cus said during one of their final late-night conversations in his cluttered office. Outside, autumn wind rattled windows that had witnessed decades of boxing history. "Promise me that when I'm gone, you won't let them change you. You're not going anywhere." "Mike!" Cus' voice carried the authority that had shaped champions for 40 years. "I'm dying. We both know it. But that's not what matters now. What matters is whether you can survive success without losing your soul." The word success hung between them like a challenge. Tyson had won every fight he'd entered, but Cus was talking about something bigger, about fame, money, the corrupting influence of people who would see him as a commodity rather than a human being. "I've taught you how to fight," Cus continued, each word seeming to cost him energy he could barely spare. "But I haven't had enough time to teach you how to live with being a champion. That scares me more than anything. What am I supposed to do without you? Remember what I told you about fear. Remember that discipline is the only thing standing between you and the chaos you came from. Remember that violence is a tool, not a master." Cus reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn photograph. Himself with Floyd Patterson after winning the heavyweight title in 1956. Both men were young, victorious, seemingly invincible. "I failed Floyd because I thought winning was enough. I thought championship belts and money would heal the wounds that brought him to me. I was wrong. The wounds never heal. They just get covered up until pressure reveals them again." Tyson stared at the photograph, seeing Cus as he'd never been. Young, hopeful, unaware of the disappointment coming. "Your wounds run deeper than Floyd's," Cus said gently. "You were abandoned earlier, hurt more completely. When you become champion, and you will, the world will try to tell you that success erases the past. Don't believe them." November 4th, 1985. Tyson was in the gym, working heavy bags with methodical fury, when Camille, Cus' companion of 14 years, burst through the doors with tears streaming down her face. "He's gone," she sobbed. "Cus is gone." The bag stopped swinging. The gym fell silent. Tyson's hands dropped to his sides as something fundamental inside him shattered like glass hitting concrete. He'd been expecting it for months, but expectation did nothing to soften the impact. Constantine D'Amato, the man who'd rescued him from an alley, taught him discipline, believed in him when no one else would, was dead at 77, having succumbed to pneumonia in his sleep. Tyson walked to the locker room, closed the door, and screamed until his throat was raw. Then he cried like he hadn't since childhood, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the same place as his destructive power. The funeral was small, attended mostly by former fighters and gym regulars who'd known Cus for decades. Tyson sat in the front row, 19 years old, but looking like a lost child. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the condolences offered by people whose names he'd never learned. As dirt covered the simple coffin, Tyson felt the same crushing aloneness that had defined his first 12 years. The structure Cus had built around him, the discipline, the guidance, the unconditional belief, aloft had died with the old man. But unlike that terrified kid in the alley, this version of Mike Tyson possessed something that made his grief infinitely more dangerous: the ability to hurt people in ways they'd never recover from. The change was immediate and unmistakable. Tyson's professional debut came 6 weeks after Cus' death, against Hector Mercedes at the Empire State Plaza Convention Center in Albany. The fight was scheduled for 4 rounds. It lasted 107 seconds. Mercedes was unconscious before he hit the canvas, victim of a right uppercut that seemed to channel aloft Tyson's grief into a single devastating blow. When he regained consciousness 3 minutes later, he sked his cornerman, who he'd been fighting. "Some kid named Tyson," the trainer replied. "Jesus Christ," Mercedes whispered, touching his swollen jaw. "That wasn't no kid." Observers noticed something different about Tyson's fighting style post-Cus. The technical precision remained, but it was now married to something more primal, more desperate. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to obliterate opponents, to make them disappear, to prove, through violence, that he was too powerful to be abandoned again. He was still unbeatable, recalled a veteran trainer who sparred with Tyson during this period. But something in his eyes had shifted. Cus used to talk about controlled aggression, boxing as art form. After died, it became something else: pure destruction. The wins piled up with terrifying consistency. Trent Singleton, knockout in round 1. Don Halpin, knockout in round 4. Rick Spain, knockout in round 1. Each victory was delivered with increasing fury, as if Tyson was trying to punch his way out of grief itself. But success couldn't fill the void Cus had left. Money, more than Tyson had ever imagined, meant nothing without the old man's approval. Fame felt hollow without Cus there to provide guidance about how to handle it. Even the championship that had once seemed so important now felt like just another way to prove his worth to someone who would never see it. Late at night, in his training camp, Tyson would sit in the same chair where Cus had delivered his final warnings. The office remained exactly as the old man had left it. Fight film scattered across his desk, handwritten training notes in margins of boxing magazines, photographs of champions spanning 4 decades. Sometimes Tyson would find himself talking to the empty room, asking questions about upcoming fights or telling Cus about opponents he was scheduled to face. The silence that answered was always the same: complete, devastating, final. The most dangerous part wasn't the grief itself, but what grief was doing to Tyson's relationship with violence. Under Cus' guidance, boxing had been about transcendence, transforming pain into purpose, chaos into art. Without that philosophical framework, fighting became purely cathartic, a way to externalize internal torment. Each knockout was a conversation with death, each opponent a stand-in for every person who'd abandoned him. His mother, who'd chosen drugs over motherhood. His father, whoever he was. The system that had written him off before he'd even started. And now Cus, who'd promised to always bet here, but had left anyway. By the end of 1985, 6 months after Cus' death, Tyson's record stood at 11-0 with 11 knockouts. The boxing world was taking notice. HBO executives were making phone calls. Promoters were drafting contracts worth millions of dollars. But those who'd known both men understood that something irreplaceable had been lost in that small apartment in Catskill. The guidance that might have helped Tyson navigate the treacherous waters off championship-level success was gone forever. Cus always said the hardest fight isn't in the ring, recalled Kevin Rooney, who'd taken over training duties. It's the fight to stay yourself when the whole world wants to change you. Without Cus there to remind him of that, Mike was fighting blind. The tragedy wasn't that Cus D'Amato died. Death comes for everyone. The tragedy was timing. He'd lived long enough to create a monster of unimaginable power, but died before he could teach that monster how to live with itself. As 1986 approached, Mike Tyson stood poised to conquer the heavyweight division and claim the championship his mentor had always promised he would win. But he would do it alone, guided only by grief and rage, carrying wounds that success would never heal. The boy who'd been saved in an alley was about to become the most feared fighter on earth. But the man who saved him was gone, and with him went the only voice that might have whispered the words Tyson desperately needed to hear. Winning isn't enough. You have to remain human. Without that reminder, victory would become its own kind of prison. Championship belts would feel like chains, and the same rage that carried him to the top would eventually pull him back down into the darkness he thought he'd escaped forever. 18 months after Cus D'Amato's death, Mike Tyson did exactly what his mentor had promised he would do. He became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. On November 22, 1986, at 20 years old, he destroyed Trevor Berbick in 2 rounds to claim the WBC title that had eluded so many great fighters. The moment the referee stopped the fight, Tyson didn't celebrate. He didn't raise his arms in triumph or embrace his cornermen. Instead, he looked toward the corner where Cus should have been standing, eyes searching for approval that would never come. "I wish Cus could have been here to see this," he told HBO's camera crew afterward, his voice cracking slightly. "Everything I am, everything I've become, it's because of him." But what Tyson had become was more complicated than the championship belt suggested. Yes, he was the most feared fighter on earth, capable of ending careers with single punches. But he was also a young man carrying wounds that success couldn't heal, navigating a world that Cus had never prepared him to face. The numbers told one story, 27-0 with 25 knockouts by the end of 1986. Most fights lasted less than 3 rounds. Several ended in less than 1 minute. Tyson wasn't just winning. He was obliterating opponents with a violence that transcended sport and entered the realm of pure spectacle. HBO executives, who had initially been skeptical about promoting a teenager, found themselves with the most marketable athlete in the world. Pay-per-view revenues shattered records. Arena tickets sold out within hours. Even people who'd never watched boxing tuned in to witness what many called controlled destruction. Mike Tyson fights weren't sporting events, observed HBO's Jim Lampley. They were cultural phenomena. People didn't come to see a competition. They came to see something that looked like nature unleashed. But those closest to Tyson saw something else entirely. They saw a boy who still checked hotel room locks multiple times before sleeping, who called Camille, Cus' companion, at 3 in the morning, needing to talk about nightmares that success couldn't quiet, who sometimes sat alone in his training camp, staring at photographs of the old man who'd saved his life. The absence of Cus' guidance became evident in ways that extended far beyond boxing. Tyson's management team, led by promoter Don King, made decisions based on short-term profit rather than long-term development. Where Cus had insisted on education and discipline, King encouraged excess and indulgence. Don King saw dollar signs where Cus saw a human soul that needed protection, recalled trainer Kevin Rooney, who tried unsuccessfully to fill the void left by D'Amato's death. Cus would have kept Mike grounded. King just wanted to milk him dry. The lifestyle that emerged around Tyson's success would have horrified his mentor. Mansions filled with hangers-on who saw him as a meal ticket rather than a person. Expensive cars purchased on impulse. Women who appeared whenever cameras were rolling and disappeared when troubles arose. All the trappings of success that Cus had warned would corrupt rather than fulfill. Most dangerously, Tyson began to believe his own mythology. The scared kid from Brownsville was buried beneath layers of hype and fear-mongering. He started referring to himself in the third person, talking about Iron Mike, as if that persona was more real than the abandoned boy who still lived inside him. "I'm the most brutal and vicious, most ruthless champion there has ever been," he declared before a 1987 title defense. "I want to eat his children." The words generated headlines and pay-per-view buys, But people who'd known the Real, Mike Tyson recognized them as a performance, one that was becoming increasingly difficult to separate from reality. In the ring, the performances remained flawless. Pinklon Thomas, knockout in round 6. Tony Tucker, unanimous decision to unify the heavyweight titles. Tyrell Biggs, knockout in round 7. Each victory added to a legend that seemed destined to redefine what dominance looked like in professional sports. But outside the ring, cracks were already showing. A marriage to actress Robin Givens that devolved into public accusations and bitter divorce proceedings. Allegations of assault that resulted in criminal charges. Increasingly erratic behavior that suggested the discipline Cus had instilled was eroding under pressure the old man had never anticipated. Mike's problem wasn't that he forgot Cus' lessons, observed longtime boxing writer Bert Sugar. His problem was that Cus died before he could teach him the most important lesson: how to be Mike Tyson when Mike Tyson was the most famous person in the world. The warning signs that worried those who truly cared about Tyson weren't found in his professional record, which remained perfect through 1988. They were found in smaller moments. The way his eyes would lose focus during conversations, as if he was somewhere else entirely. How he would sometimes call training sessions off without explanation, disappearing for days at a time. The increasing reliance on people who fed his ego rather than challenging him to grow. Most troubling was his relationship with violence itself. Under Cus' tutelage, boxing had been about transcendence, transforming pain into art, chaos into controlled aggression. But without that philosophical framework, fighting became purely cathartic, a way to externalize internal torment that never seemed to diminish. He was still technically perfect, remembered sparring partner Greg Page. But there was something different about why he was fighting. Before, it was about proving Cus right. After, it seemed like he was just trying to prove he still existed. By early 1988, Tyson's cultural impact extended far beyond sports. He appeared on magazine covers, starred in commercials, became a symbol of American power that resonated globally. Children mimicked his distinctive fighting style in playgrounds. Adults quoted his pre-fight interviews at dinner parties. He had transcended boxing to become a genuine cultural icon. But icons, unlike people, aren't allowed to be vulnerable or uncertain or afraid. They exist to fulfill public expectations rather than private needs. And Mike Tyson, the real person, not the persona, was still very much that frightened kid who needed someone to believe in him. The tragedy wasn't that success corrupted Tyson. The tragedy was that success isolated him from the very relationships that might have helped him navigate its challenges. Cus had understood that championship belts and million-dollar purses were just external validation, meaningful only if the person receiving them remained grounded in something deeper. Cus always said the hardest part wouldn't be becoming champion, Tyson reflected years later. It would be staying human after becoming champion. Without him there to remind me of that, I got lost in the mythology everyone else created. As the 1980s drew to a close, Mike Tyson stood atop the sporting world as its most dominant and recognizable figure. He was undefeated in 37 professional fights. He held all major heavyweight titles. He commanded purses that dwarfed what previous champions had earned in entire careers. But late at night, in quiet moments between the chaos of fame and the spectacle of violence, he was still that 12-year-old boy crouched behind a dumpster in Brownsville, waiting for someone to save him. The difference was that his savior was gone, and the very success Cus had promised would liberate him had become its own kind of prison. Every knockout was a conversation with ghosts. Every victory was a reminder of who wasn't there to witness it. Every belt was beautiful and meaningless without the approval of the man who'd taught him to believe he deserved them. In that small apartment above the Catskill gym, surrounded by photographs of champions and handwritten training notes that no one else could decipher, Cus D'Amato had built something unprecedented, a perfect fighting machine powered by controlled rage and disciplined fury. But he died before he could complete his most important work, teaching that machine how to live with the consequences of its own perfection. The alley where it all began still exists in Brownsville, unchanged by the fame of the boy who was nearly destroyed there. The gym in Catskill remains, though it's quieter now, filled with aspiring fighters who train in the shadow of a legend they'll never match. And somewhere between those two places, between the darkness that nearly consumed him and the light that saved him, lies the truth about Mike Tyson's story. Not just the rise of a champion, but the cost-off greatness when it comes too early and leaves too quickly. Mike Tyson conquered the world, but without Cus D'Amato, he never truly conquered himself. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.